Hello and welcome back to English Every Day. In this series, you improve your English through true stories, learn about inspiring people, and discover valuable life lessons. Today, we continue the incredible journey of Helen Keller. In the last episode, we saw how Helen lived in a world of silence and darkness. She could not see, she could not hear, she could not speak. Her parents loved her deeply, but they did not know how to help her. As Helen grew older, they became more worried. Every day they asked the same questions. Is there anyone who can help our daughter? At first they had no answer, but they refused to give up. Helen was now almost 7 years old. She was growing quickly. She was smart. She was curious. She wanted to understand the world. But without language, she became frustrated more and more often. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she smiled, but sometimes she became very angry. She could not explain what she wanted. She could not ask simple questions. She could not tell people how she felt. Her parents knew that time was passing. If they waited too long, Helen might never learn how to communicate. So they made an important decision. They would search for help no matter how long it took, no matter how far they had to travel. Helen's mother never stopped believing in her daughter. She believed that Helen was intelligent. She believed there was still hope. One day she read about another child who had learned to communicate despite serious disabilities. That story gave her hope. She said to her husband, "There must be someone who can teach Helen." Her husband agreed. Soon they began asking doctors and experts for advice. Many people could not help them. Some had no experience, others simply said that nothing could be done. But Helen's parents refused to accept that answer. They believed every child deserved a chance, and they continued searching. Finally, they heard about a famous man. His name was Alexander Graham Bell. Many people know him as the inventor of the telephone, but Bell also cared deeply about children who could not hear. He believed they could learn. He believed they could build meaningful lives. Helen's parents decided to meet him. They hoped he could guide them in the right direction. They traveled with young Helen to visit him. It was a journey filled with hope. They did not know if this meeting would change anything, but they knew they had to try. Sometimes one meeting can change a person's entire future. And this meeting was about to become one of the most important moments in Helen Keller's life. When Helen Keller and her parents met Alexander Graham Bell, they felt both nervous and hopeful. Bell was already famous, but he was also known for helping deaf children and supporting their education. Helen's parents explained their daughter's situation. They told Bell that Helen could not see. They told him that she could not hear. They told him that she had no way to communicate. Bell listened carefully. He understood how serious the challenge was, but he also saw something important. He saw that Helen was intelligent. He saw that she was curious. He saw that she needed the right teacher. Bell gave Helen's parents valuable advice. He suggested that they contact the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston. This school had experience helping blind students learn and communicate. For Helen's parents, this was a new source of hope. Maybe finally they had found the right path. At the Perkins Institution, there was a young woman named Anne Sullivan. Anne Sullivan was not an ordinary teacher. She had faced many hardships in her own life. As a child, Anne had serious problems with her eyesight. She grew up in poverty. She lost family members. She experienced loneliness and struggle. But Anne was strong. She was determined. She believed in the power of education. She worked hard at the Perkins Institution and became an excellent student. Because Anne had faced difficulties herself, she understood suffering. She understood frustration. She understood what it felt like to be limited by physical problems. This made her different from other teachers. She did not simply see Helen as a child with disabilities. She saw Helen as a child with potential. When the Perkins Institution received the request from Helen's family, Anne Sullivan was chosen to become Helen's teacher. At that time, Anne was only 20 years old. She was young, she had little teaching experience, and the task ahead of her was extremely difficult. How do you teach a child who cannot see and cannot hear? How do you explain words to someone who has never heard spoken language? How do you open the mind of a child trapped in silence and darkness? Many people would have been afraid of this challenge, but Anne Sullivan was not afraid. She accepted the responsibility. She believed Helen could learn. She believed Helen's mind could be reached, and she prepared for the journey to Alabama. Before Anne Sullivan met Helen Keller, she spent time learning about the child she would teach. She learned that Helen was intelligent. She learned that Helen was curious. She learned that Helen often became frustrated because she could not communicate. Anne understood that this would not be an easy job, but she also understood something very important. Helen did not need pity. Helen needed education. Helen needed discipline. Helen needed patience. And most of all, Helen needed someone who believed in her ability to learn. Anne Sullivan was ready to become that person. Finally, in March 1887, Anne Sullivan traveled to Tuscumbia, Alabama, to meet Helen Keller for the first time. Helen was waiting at home. She did not know that her life was about to change forever. Anne arrived carrying a small suitcase and a big responsibility. She was about to begin one of the most important teaching relationships in history. Neither Helen nor Anne knew it yet, but this meeting would change both of their lives forever. When Helen Keller and her parents arrived to meet Alexander Graham Bell, they were both nervous and hopeful. For a long time, they had been searching for someone who could help their daughter. Now they are finally meeting a man who believed that children with disabilities could learn. Alexander Graham Bell welcomed to the family warmly. He smiled at Helen. He watched her carefully. He saw something that many other people did not see. He did not see a child without hope. He saw a child with intelligence. He saw a child who simply needed the right teacher. Bell spent time talking with Helen's parents. They explained everything. They talked about Helen's illness. They described her daily struggles. They spoke about her anger, her frustration, and her desire to communicate. Bell listened carefully. He understood that Helen's biggest problem was not her intelligence. Her biggest problem was that nobody had been able to teach her language. Then Bell gave the family an important piece of advice. He told them to contact the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston. He believed that someone there might be able to help Helen. This simple advice would soon change history. The Perkins Institution was one of the best schools for blind students in America. Many talented teachers worked there. One of them was a young woman named Anne Sullivan. Anne was only 20 years old. She was still very young, but she understood pain better than most people. When Anne was a child, she had serious problems with her own eyesight. She grew up in poverty. Life was not easy for her. She lost family members at a young age. She spent years in a poorhouse. Later, she studied at Perkins and worked hard to improve her education. Anne knew what it felt like to struggle. She knew what it felt like to feel different. Perhaps that is why she never stopped believing in children who faced difficult challenges. When the school received a letter asking for help, Anne Sullivan was chosen. It was a big responsibility. Nobody knew if she would succeed. Teaching a child who could neither see nor hear seemed almost impossible. But Anne accepted the challenge without fear. She believed that every child could learn if someone found the right way to teach. She packed her small bag. She said goodbye to her school. Then she began the long journey to Alabama. She did not know exactly what she would find. She did not know how difficult the job would be. But deep inside, she believed she could make a difference. She was about to meet a little girl whose name would one day be known around the world. And that meeting was now only a few days away. Anne Sullivan began her journey from Boston to Alabama. It was a long trip. As the train moved across towns and villages, Anne looked out of the window and thought about the little girl she was going to meet. She had never met Helen Keller before, she only knew what people had told her. A young girl, blind, deaf, unable to speak. Many people believed that teaching Helen was impossible, but Anne did not think that way. She believed that every child could learn. The only question was how. As the train continued its journey, Anne remembered her own childhood. Life had not been kind to her. She had lost people she loved. She had lived in poverty. She had spent years struggling with poor eyesight. Many times she had felt lonely. Many times she had felt forgotten. But she never stopped believing that education could change a person's life. Now she hoped she could give Helen the same opportunity. She quietly said to herself, "I will do my best." Those simple words would soon change history. Finally, after many hours of traveling, Anne Sullivan arrived in Tuscumbia, Alabama. The Keller family was waiting for her. Captain Arthur Keller warmly welcomed the young teacher. Kate Keller smiled with hope. She knew this visit could change her daughter's future. Anne was only 20 years old. She looked young, but behind her gentle smile was a woman with great courage. She carried only a few bags. One of them held a small gift for Helen. It was a beautiful doll. Anne hoped the doll would help her make a friendly first impression. A few moments later, Helen entered the room. She did not know who the visitor was. She could not see Anne. She could not hear her voice. As always, Helen reached out with her hands. She gently touched Anne's wrist. Then she touched her face. She wanted to know who this new person was. Anne stayed calm. She let Helen explore with her hands. She understood that touch was Helen's way of seeing the world. For a moment neither of them spoke. There were no words, only silence, but something special had already begun. Anne gave Helen a doll. Helen smiled. She enjoyed touching the doll with her hands. She explored its face, its clothes, and its shape. Anne watched carefully. She noticed how curious Helen was. She noticed how quickly Helen learned through touch. And that moment, Anne realized something important. Helen was not unable to learn. She simply had never been taught in the right way. This gave Anne hope, but only a few minutes later, she also discovered another challenge. Helen was not used to following rules. She often did whatever she wanted. If she became frustrated, she pushed people away. Sometimes she threw things. Sometimes she became angry. Her family loved her so much that they often allowed these behaviors. Anne understood that teaching Helen would not be easy. Before teaching words, she would first have to teach discipline, trust, and patience. It would be the hardest job of her life. That evening, Anne sat quietly in her room. She thought about everything she had seen. She knew the road ahead would be long. There would be difficult days. There would be mistakes. There would be moments when both teachers and student wanted to give up. But Anne had already made her decision. She would never stop trying. She believed that somewhere inside Helen's silent world, a brilliant mind was waiting to be discovered. She just needed the right key to unlock it. Neither Anne nor Helen knew it yet, but the greatest moment of their lives was only a few days away. A simple word, a simple object, and a simple moment would soon change everything forever. Thank you for listening to English Every Day. This was part 3 of Helen Keller's life story, but the journey has only begun. In the next episode, you will witness one of the most famous moments in history, the lesson that opened the door to Helen Keller's world. The story continues. Join us tomorrow for part 4. Until then, keep learning English, keep believing in yourself, and remember, sometimes one teacher can change a life, and sometimes that life can change the world.